Sanusha, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Your overall thoughts looking at gender, demographics and other balances that we usually look out for when these kinds of appointments are made.
Good evening, Voyo. Yeah, it's quite an interesting announcement of the Western Cape MECs and the legislature. I think what's interesting as well is that it's got a bit of a mix of the old and the new. So you see three new faces, including the former Speaker of the legislature, Shanaz Fernandez, and then of course you've got David Maynier, who's come in as Finance MEC, which used to be, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Alan Winde's position, the MEC for Economic Development or around that part. And then of course you've got those that have been retained. There's been a bit of a shift with Bongi Nkosi Madikizela now the MEC for Transport. And I think, again, in terms of keeping up with the 50-50% gender parity, the racial, the transformation agenda, etc. Yeah, you kind of see some of that being incorporated into the newly constituted cabinet of the Western Cape, but also you kind of get the sense that it retains more of a male dominance in terms of representation when it comes to gender. So I think one of the key things to go in terms of what this new legislation and the MECs are going to be like in terms of the driving force between Alan Winde's position as President of Policies is how much of this is going to be aligning with national and how much of it is going to be aligning with the provincial priorities for the Premier and his cabinet.
Bongi Nkosi Madikizela as MEC for Transport and Public Works, is that senior enough for the man who leads the party in that part of the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been an interesting dynamic in the Western Cape, even in the context of him trying to, he was the opponent to Alan Winde, and Alan Winde eventually was elected as the candidate for the premiership in the province. I'm not sure if it's a strong enough position for him, but I think it will be important because of the way in which the transport system in the province has got its own demons and its own infrastructure challenges as well. Obviously, there's a national transport strategy with regard to the upgrading of the trains and the system and the question of new technology. There's been a sense from the DA as well in terms of some of these dynamics and how they would like to pursue this in terms of them pursuing policies that could actually be much more embedded and create a more dynamic transport system. Because in the Western Cape, you know that public transport is a preferred choice. If people can have safety, etc., they do use the public transport system. So it could be an interesting dynamic for Mr. Madikizela in terms of how he takes that portfolio and, of course, aligns it to some of these new trains, etc. But of course, we've got to remember that there's also the bigger challenge at the national level. But perhaps there's something here that could be done, especially given the spatial organization of the city and, of course, the way in which it's becoming congested in terms of the clogging up of the N1 and the N2, particularly for those areas like Khayelitsha and staying on the periphery of the city center.
Albert Fritz as Community Safety MEC. I mean, in a province parts of which are ganglands, where schools and innocent people are caught, school children and innocent people are caught in the crossfire. Is he a tough enough guy?
It's difficult to say. The Western Cape is a tough city and a tough province when it comes to these kinds of crime-related issues, questions of, as you say, the infighting, the gang wars on the Cape Flats, but also let's not forget the turf wars in terms of the underworld and linked to all kinds of interesting criminal networks and dynamics. I think one of the challenges for the new MEC for safety, of community safety, would be how much of interaction takes place with the people of the Cape Flats and other areas where crime and gang-related crime and other levels of crime are quite rife. Also, let's not forget crime related to socioeconomic issues as well. So I think there's going to be it will be interesting to see the dialogue that takes place, the kind of emphasis, effort, and policies that are implemented. And I think one of the things that we need to also be very candid about is the fact that how much of this can actually be rolled out by the province itself in terms of its own resources, infrastructure, and dealing with the level of crime and the interventions, as opposed to saying, well, we're waiting for national.
Of course, I mean, the provincial cabinets, but also municipalities, as we have learnt in the case of Cape Town when Patricia de Lille was in charge. These structures work well for as long as people are prepared to find one another and get along. When you look at this provincial cabinet overall, any chance of any unraveling, any relations that may go sour in the event strong-willed personalities don't get along?
I think time will tell, but I do think what was very interesting when the Premier took his oath of office yesterday was to talk about audit of lifestyle, or lifestyle audits rather. And I think that's going to be an interesting approach to the idea of saying, well, we're starting with governance within our own legislature, within our own process, within our own members. And of course, in terms of the relationships and so forth, it'll be interesting. Perhaps there will be some personality clashes. I think there are some big personalities, especially people who may feel that they need to also start pursuing their career paths as well. But I think what's important here is whether or not we're going to see the DA try and ensure that they recover from the whole Patricia de Lille saga. We still have a 2021 local government election where the mayor will have to, depending who the mayoral candidate will be for the DA for the city of Cape Town. But I think what's also important is using this time to try and also reassess where some of the points of loss of electoral support, particularly in areas that perhaps you could have done better. The DA will definitely need to think about how to build that traction again, and perhaps also try and have more connectivity in terms of the communities and this new cabinet. So obviously, it's still early days for them. I think one of the things that Alan Winde said, which was really important, is that this is going to be not the way. I mean, it's going to be his premiership, his policies going forward in terms of within the party, etc. And of course, it was quite interesting to see Patricia de Lille also. Not Patricia de Lille, Helen Zille coming in and congratulating him, but I think he also wants to stamp his own view and own policy on this premiership. So it's still early days, but I think you still got the local government election to come through, and in that context, it will be very interesting to see.
That's what I'm going to leave with. Thanks very much for your time.